It's been an unprecedented 48 hours in British politics. A week-long standoff between Andy Burnham and the Westminster government ended with a live TV conference as Manchester leaders decried the government walking away from negotiations after they refused to budge on the financial support they felt they needed to go into Tier 3. The question for tonight's show is that Boris Johnson's intransigence on Brexit is already threatening to break up the UK. Will his intransigence on COVID-19 undermine the fabric that holds England together? I know you love these constitutional questions, Aaron, so I'm delighted to be joined by you this evening.
Well, not as much as James Butler, but yes, I do. Thank you very much.
I feel like James Butler does the sort of nitty-gritty of it. So he knows what's in the Constitution, whereas you can do the speculation about it's all about to explode, which I think is more appropriate right now.
It's been exploding for a long time, hasn't it? But no, now it's really coming home to England, which is very interesting, very new, yes.
I'm also going to speak to Salford Mayor Paul Dennett about this issue. Brilliant to have him on the show. And we have some other big stories for you tonight. There's loads going on. Marcus Rashford versus Boris Johnson, part 2. Why the Conservatives are going hell for leather against critical race theory, which most of us had never really heard of before it got brought up in Parliament this week. And the neo-Nazi who was a contestant on Sky History's new carpentry show. That was an odd one. Before we do that, as ever, share the show link and tweet your comments on the hashtag #TyskySour. First story. Yesterday, leaders in Greater Manchester called an impromptu press conference to explain how negotiations between themselves and central government had broken down. So Manchester leaders believed they needed at least £65 million to prevent the poorest members of their community suffering in a Tier 3 lockdown. Johnson wouldn't offer more than £60 million, and the Manchester leaders walked away. Now, commenting on the relatively small difference between those two figures, £60 million and £65 million, Nick Watt from Newsnight asked if Andy Burnham was showboating. Andy Burnham gave an impressive response.
Nick, what I would say is there is a major point of principle at stake here. What is fair treatment for the lowest paid in our society? Is 2/3 of their wages fair when their workplace is closed? Is that fair? I would imagine that most people can, myself included, in more middle income jobs can live on 2/3 of our wages. But how many people understand what it would be like to live on 2/3 of your wages if you are currently on the minimum wage? What do you think is going through their minds tonight? Those people who know they can't pay 2/3 of their rent or their bills. That is what is at stake here, Nick. And you say it's a small amount of money. Well, it's a small amount of money to the government maybe, but it's not a small amount of money to people here, to the public authorities here. You ask all of these councils behind me how much they are short of in their budgets as a result of what has happened this year and the lack of commitments that they've had from the government. It's not a small amount of money to people here. We're struggling to run the trams. We're struggling to support people off the streets. We've got people donating to help our efforts to give people a bed for every night in this city region. We are struggling to make this work. This pandemic has hit the north of England harder than it has other places because of the entrenched poverty that there is in the north of England, because Westminster has neglected the north of England for so many years. So you say it's a small amount of money. For the government, maybe, but not for us. And listen to what Sir Richard said. It's interesting what the government has found money for during this pandemic, and it's interesting what they have not found money for. Today, they have not been prepared to find money for the lowest paid in our city region, for the self-employed. And I think people will take note of that and draw their own conclusions.
That was an explanation of the injustices of government policy that many of people have been wishing, other Labour leaders could do quite so effectively. Anyway, good job, Andy Burnham, there. What I want to show you now is another clip from that press conference. You've probably seen it already because 3 million people on Twitter have viewed it, and it went out on the evening news. But I think this is, probably going to be one of the most memorable clips, one of the most memorable moments of this, really bizarre year in politics already. So we do want to show it again. So this is the extraordinary moment where Manchester leaders discovered the details of the lockdown that was going to be imposed on their region live on the BBC.
1 minute past midnight on Friday, the cut next to 22. Right. Okay, is that the same thing?
Yeah. Shall I? Right. So it's going to come into effect on Friday.
At 1 minute past midnight on Friday, this is what's been said to MPs. It's going to be £20 million only, and they are going to try and pick off individual councils.
I mean, it's brutal, to be honest, isn't it? This is no way to run the country in a national crisis. It isn't. This is not right. They should not be doing this, grinding people down, trying to accept the least that they can get away with. £22 million to fight the situation that we are in is frankly disgraceful.
So obviously that clip caused absolute outrage. It just seems so disrespectful how the government are treating the leaders in Greater Manchester. So sort of to push back against this very, I suppose, unhelpful image for the central government, for the Westminster government, they kind of tried to make out that Andy Burnham was faking it, that he was putting it on, that actually he did already know the details. Let's take a look at Community Secretary Robert Jenrick speaking to Sky's Kay Burley this morning.
How fair was it that he found out live on the telly?
He didn't.
They were holding a phone up, and he
didn't.
So when did he find out?
I phoned him and told him.
Did you when?
Well, we had several conversations over the course of the morning, including with the Prime Minister, and I told him the final news at 2:00.
So he was showboating?
Well, I'm not in the slightest bit interested in point scoring. This isn't about personalities or press conferences on the steps of town halls. In the end, it's about an important public health situation, and it's about ensuring that the people of Greater Manchester now get the support that they deserve.
So is Andy Burnham just a very good actor? Was that all staged? It doesn't seem so. So Nadine Dorries later in the day sort of tweeted out Nadine Dorries, obviously a Tory frontbencher, tweeted out in response to those comments from Robert Jenrick that, Andy Burnham was just putting it all on. He replied with a clarification which sort of makes clear what actually went on. So this is a tweet from Andy Burnham. For the sake of accuracy, Nadine, it was the moment I was informed we were getting 22 million and nothing more. That was before the 60 million was put back on the table. You were right, though, that I received a phone call at 2 p.m. to say the government was walking away from negotiations. So, of course, actually, it does make sense that they didn't find out that the tier 3 lockdown was being imposed then, because they were doing the press conference to say the negotiations had broken down. What Andy Burnham found out there, live on the cameras, was that, well, at that point in time, anyway, it seemed as if the government was only going to give £23 million to Manchester after having offered them 60 million. Obviously, that was a figure that Andy Burnham didn't accept. It turns out that in the end, they have earmarked more money for Manchester, but why they couldn't just say that from the outset, I don't really know. To get back to the substance of the issue, so Robert Jenrick did expand in a different interview this morning with ITV the logic behind the government's thinking. Here he is explaining the formula for funding this morning. He said it was well known, even if no one actually knew about it.
Well, the formula is well known. You can see exactly the amount of money that local areas get. It's on a per capita basis, it's well known to all, and we've managed to agree successfully with every part of the country bar one on that basis.
What is the formula?
Well, we're offering, in addition to the national support, funding for local councils to do extra work like contact tracing, which is equivalent to £8 per head, and for additional business support, we're offering funding which is approximately around £20 per capita. That's exactly what you'll see that we've done in Merseyside, is what we've done in Lancashire, and I expect it's what you'll see in deals to come.
All right, I know you're sick of hearing Robert Jenrick's side of the story, so we're going to go straight now to a leader in Greater Manchester who was on the other side of the talk. So this is Salford Mayor Paul Dennett. I spoke to him earlier today, and I started by asking what he thought the drawn-out negotiations had achieved.
So obviously we've been negotiating with government since the 9th of October, and for us this has always been about what the evidence is telling us, and we did our homework before we went into those negotiations. So we know in Greater Manchester that unemployment's doubled between March and May of this year. We've seen a 76% increase in universal credit between March and September. We've seen 408,000 people actually access the furlough arrangement here in Greater Manchester, which we know comes to an end at the end of this month. And certainly in my city of Salford, we've seen 42,000 people access those furlough arrangements. Over 25% of the working population have been dependent during this time on furlough arrangement. And this is all before, obviously, negotiating with government the support package that we need for, obviously, those tier 3 restrictions that government want to bring in. So, the negotiation's been ongoing. A lot of it has been very much, certainly yesterday, it's all been about money, to be honest with you. So, we went into those negotiations having costed what we felt Greater Manchester needed at £90 million for the next 6 months. And then we thought we could probably reduce that down to 75, given that, the month of October is nearing closure. And government came forward and offered us 55 million. And, that would not have enabled us within Greater Manchester to meet the needs of our residents. So we couldn't accept that. Andy Burnham continued those negotiations on behalf of Greater Manchester leaders, managed to get it up to 60 million. But even then, it's quite a way off the 75 million pounds we need.
So, many people will have looked at this and saw the Westminster government being very intransigent with the Northwest, with Greater Manchester. And what impact do you think that is going to have on people's inclinations to follow the COVID rules? And also, sort of in the longer term, do you think this is going to have a real impact on relationships between Greater Manchester, the Northwest, and Westminster?
In terms of the impact of this on, how people will take the rules, we've always been clear, we need to abide by the law and we need to abide by Public Health England advice and guidance, in terms of wearing masks, physically distancing, regularly washing your hands. All of these sorts of things remain very much part of the work we've been doing here in Greater Manchester for many, many months now. And I know my own local authority, we've redeployed staff across the local authority to, get out there into communities to talk to residents, to share information, advice and guidance, hand out masks and hand sanitizer and all this sort of stuff. We've taken that really, really seriously, and we will continue to do so. And in our comms, we will be, informing members of the public that these are the rules and everyone should abide by them. Because at the end of the day, it's all of our responsibilities to tackle the COVID-19 virus, as well as
in terms of the broader politics, though, because I've been a bit of a meme on social media. I don't know how much traction you think that's going to have, but the kind of level of resentment this has created among people in the north of England, the way they've been treated by Westminster. What do you think is going to be the fallout from that?
Well, for me, I've always wanted to see the North come together in the interests of the North. But for me, this has never really been a kind of North and South issue, if I'm really honest with you. I think the real issue in all of this is the economic strategy that the government has been pursuing for many, many years. My local authority has seen 10 years of austerity. 211 million has been taken out of the revenue budget of the city council, whilst at the same time government is telling us to grow our economy, build more homes and do all of this. And, we know now that, this economic strategy has not worked as well as it should have done. And, we've opened up, our local economies to global capital, and, return on investment seems to be more important than, improving people's welfare and people's, livelihoods at the end of the day. And we've got to recalibrate that. And for me, that's not a North and South issue. That's about how the whole of the country can come together, actually, to engender, if you like, a much more progressive economic settlement and arrangement for the people we all seek to serve.
There was a bit of a difficult edit there. The final question I'd asked was whether, the North is going to seek independence from England. I wasn't expecting an answer that was yes, but that was interesting, wasn't it, Aaron? This idea that Paul Dennett is not seeing it as it's being reported in much of the country. This is the North versus London, but that this is a this is a class issue, and he doesn't seem ready to declare independence for Salford. I suppose we weren't expecting to, but how do you think this is going to play out? Obviously, it has been reported as a divide between the North and the South, or is this just something which is showing the failure of Boris Johnson's approach, across the whole of the UK?
It's a great question. I would say that effectively any manifestation of local government that seeks to defy the Tories is going to get this. We're seeing that equally with Sadiq Khan and TfL in London. If anything, actually, what's going on there is far worse than anything we're seeing in the north of England. Because, yes, this is about a terrible short-term deal for Greater Manchester, but TfL in order to get this short-term holding arrangement for the next couple of months, really, Sadiq Khan has to accept higher rates of council tax, increases to tube and bus fares, and a huge, and I don't really care about increasing the congestion charge zone, but a huge increase in the congestion charge zone. Clearly, this is the last possible time you would want to do it. Businesses already are struggling, et cetera, although generally I'm not opposed to that as an idea. I think that in combination with these other measures, not particularly good. And especially right now, of course we need to expand public transport, but people can't in the middle of a pandemic. So I wouldn't say it's the North versus the South. I'd say really it's any, like I say, expression of local government standing up to the Tories. However, I do think it's important to say the broader context here is that, Britain is not a nation state. Its institutions are really the relic of an empire. And it does feel like Downing Street is dealing with Andy Burnham as if he was, an upstart native in some occupied colony. I mean, that seems to be how they feel about him. And this is nothing new. The exact same thing happened with Margaret Thatcher and local government in this country in the 1980s. You had the same thing in Southwark Council, with Liverpool Council, with the Greater London Council and Ken Livingstone. So it's a bit more complicated than that. But I think culturally it will almost certainly fall into a north-south thing. And actually, given the way this country's economy works, I think that's partly deserved.
Well, it's quite interesting, actually, because you say, there's also a dispute going on between London and, well, obviously Westminster's in London, but Sadiq Khan and the central government at the moment about TfL, as you say. So they're saying it's indebted because you froze ticket costs, fares. I was looking, it's like, what? I was calling it an entry fee. I haven't been on a bus for so long because the fucking lockdown. I can't remember what it's called when you were. Well, I've been on like twice, but also I suppose you use your Oyster, so you forget all this shit. But anyway, I feel much more alien to public transport than I did before coronavirus hit. In any case, they are trying to blame the indebtedness of TfL on Sadiq Khan's fare freeze when, obviously the impact of coronavirus and people going in and out of London has fallen by about 75%. Obviously, that's a lot more impactful than wages not going up above inflation for 4. It's completely bizarre, but it's a clearly cynical move to try and leverage a crisis to their advantage and basically to try and embarrass Sadiq Khan. And the thing that London and Manchester have in common is that they're Labour cities. They're cities where the Conservatives don't have that much hope of winning. People are saying this will, upset their red wall seats, but the war they've started is with a metropolitan mayor, it's Andy Burnham. Yeah. He is, the mayor of a cosmopolitan Labour voting city, and they are, just as Thatcher was before, quite happy to, attempt to humiliate them and try and, I suppose, damage their electorates to make a political point. It's what Margaret Thatcher did in so much of the country.
Yeah,
that's why you saw riots, but it was very successfully electorally, and you could see the same thing go on here. Right?
Very successful.
Loads of social discontent, but still, the Tories can find a way through our sort of political geography to get re-elected.
And importantly, the Trafford Council last year, I think it was the first time Labour won it in decades. I can't remember was it last year or 2018? But Trafford Council was this huge, totemic gain for Labour at local government level. They didn't make gains they wanted elsewhere in places like Wandsworth, but Trafford was a success story. So that's entirely right. For us in the south, in London or Manchester's near enough Darlington, they're a long way apart from each other economically, culturally, demographically. So I think that's absolutely right. The Tories, on the one hand, want to make an example of these people. On the other, want to punish their electorates for not voting Tory. But equally, if these places never vote for the Tory party ever again, they don't really care. It's interesting. It's almost like, how they've given up with Scotland. The Tories now, when they think about how do we build a majority, they just write Scotland off. They might get maybe 5 seats, but it's not figuring in there, how do we get to Downing Street? How do we get a majority? And increasingly, that's going to be the case for large parts of the country, particularly large metropolitan areas, places with large racial minorities, large numbers of graduates, public sector workers, etc. That new Labour base. And the reality is, as we saw last December, the Tories can win without those people. They can win without those people. And that's a really important corrective. Even if we say, isn't it great Andy Burnham's going all in, he's standing up for the people he represents, as he should be, that doesn't necessarily mean, in and of itself, this in isolation is enough to put the Tories on the back foot. And
so in terms of, lots of people are comparing Andy Burnham to Keir Starmer. They're very different styles of leadership, who's offering more effective opposition right now. On the part of the National Labour Party. I mean, it's fairly uncontroversial. It's clear that they haven't been as oppositional as Andy Burnham has been, but they have tried to back him up somewhat. There was an opposition debate today, which means that the opposition gets to sort of decide upon a motion to be debated in Parliament. There is a vote on it, even though if they win, it doesn't go into law. It's not a bill. But there were two today. We're going to talk about the one related to free school meals later, but the first one was related to this. The UK Labour Party are calling for a fair national deal against the kind of bland language that we're used to. But anyway, they were backing up Andy Burnham's claim to say that we should have a furlough which is 80% of wages, not arbitrarily 2/3 as Rishi Sunak is offering. Anyway, this obviously fell. I mean, no one was really expecting this to pass in Westminster. But I do want to show you a fairly surreal moment from that debate. And I think it shows quite how high tensions are rising on this particular issue.
Today's last-minute debate has all the hallmarks of the same opportunism that's done so much damage over the past few days. No doubt with a carefully calculated vote at the end designed for release on social media afterwards. I implore members opposite to park the opportunism. I know the Honourable Member for Stretford and Urmston thinks this is a good crisis which the Labour Party should exploit. And I know she speaks for a lot of her frontbench colleagues when she says that. You just need to see it in the support, U-turn, oppose approach that's characterised their hindsight-heavy behaviour. But, excuse me, did the Honourable Lady just call me scum?
Order! 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 From the front bench, we will not have remarks like that. Not under any circumstances, no matter how heartfelt it might be. Not at all. Point of order.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think one of the things I'd ask your guidance on is the honourable members saying things about the front bench which is inaccurate in their speech, and I'd ask them to withdraw it.
It's not for the chair to decide what is accurate or inaccurate. I cannot make such a judgment, but of course I will ask the honourable gentleman to be reasonable in what he says and to be careful of his remarks. And I'm sure that if the honourable gentleman feels that he has said anything that is offensive to the honourable lady, then he will undoubtedly withdraw and apologise immediately.
It was kind of ambiguous there. Was Angela Rayner denying she'd said scum, or was Angela Rayner saying I might have said scum, but he'd previously said something inaccurate about me?
It was an amazing. I thought her response was really quick thinking on her feet. It was excellent. And by the way, he is scum.
He is scum, obviously.
Hate the sinner, hate the sin, not the sinner. So I think it's better to say it's scummy behaviour. Doing what he was doing was inarguably scummy behaviour. The question of, it's civility, we will never have that in the House of Commons. What would a Tory, it's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? What would a Tory have to say in order for the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker to say, that is just not acceptable? If he was, I was best friends with Jimmy Savile, he was a great guy. Somebody might go, that's somebody might comment as Angela Rayner did there. Would that be unacceptable? I mean, clearly people are allowed to make ethical judgments. Anyway.
We're not going to spend too much time talking about that very bizarre clip. But Angela Rayner, if you did call him scum, good for you. We're cool with that. He is.
Says, well, I know it's going to piss you off. It's your show. Scum is a horrible word to use with somebody, by the way. I hate it as a word, even though it's a very common word. Scum was absolutely apposite here.
We're going to go on to our next story. Before we do that, share the show link. We've got, I think, about 1,800 people watching. We can get that much higher. The government has had a lot on its plate this week. We have a virus spiralling out of control, ICU departments filling up, and millions at risk of losing their jobs in a series of local lockdown. But it's not coronavirus and its consequences that is of most concern to Tory frontbencher Kemi Badenoch this week. So instead, it's the scourge of critical race theory.
What we are against is the teaching of contested political ideas as if they are accepted facts. We don't do this with communism, we don't do this with socialism, we don't do it with capitalism. And I want to speak about a dangerous trend in race relations that has come far too close to home to my life, and it is the promotion of critical race theory, an ideology that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression. I want to be absolutely clear, this government stands unequivocally against critical race theory. Some schools have decided to openly support the anti-capitalist Black Lives Matter group, often fully aware that they have a statutory duty to be politically impartial. Black lives do matter, of course they do. But we know that the Black Lives Matter movement, capital BLM, is political. I know this because at the height of the protest, I've been told of white Black Lives Matter protesters calling, and I'm afraid I apologize for saying this word, calling a black armed police officer guarding Downing Street a pet nigger. That is why we do not endorse that movement on this side of the House. It is a political movement, and what would be nice would be for members on the opposite side to condemn many of the actions that we see this political movement instead of pretending that it is a completely wholesome anti-racist organization. There is a lot of pernicious stuff that is being pushed, and we stand against that. We do not want to see teachers teaching their white pupils about white privilege and inherited racial guilt. And let me be clear, any school which teaches these elements of critical race theory as fact, or which promotes partisan political views such as defunding the police without offering a balanced treatment of opposing views, is breaking the law.
So the Tory parties oppose critical race theory. It's very, very bizarre. I have to admit, I didn't really know what critical race theory was. So to find out why the Conservatives found it quite so threatening, I spoke to Professor of Law at the Birkbeck School of Law, Kojo Karam, and I started by asking him, what is it? What is critical race theory?
So critical race theory is, at least in its kind of main form, a academic tradition that emerged out of critical legal studies, which was really centered at Harvard Law School, and it emerged really in around the 1980s. The founders of critical race theory are usually identified as people such as Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, Patricia Williams, and Kimberly Crenshaw as well, as a young student who is often credited for coming up with the name of critical race theory. And what they were really trying to understand in this particular moment was the difference between the legal equality that had been achieved through the civil rights struggle, people like Derek Bell were actual civil rights advocates, working with people like Thurgood Marshall and some of the major civil rights attorneys. So they'd seen their work on the ground achieve legal equality through Brown versus Board of Education, through the Loving case, but looked around in the 1980s of America and still saw massive inequalities in how the law was applied to different racial groups. And so critical race theory really emerged out of the attempt to try and make sense of that and try and explain how the law could present itself as being impartial at the same time as having massively disparate impacts on different communities.
So critical race theory, it's a theory that emerged out of Harvard in the 1980s from legal scholars. And as Kojo explained there, it was to sort of point out that legal equality hadn't always brought about social equality and sort of ask questions about that. Now, you might not be surprised that right-wingers might oppose, such a stream of thought that says legal equality isn't quite enough. Maybe we need various, other reforms to bring about equality. The Conservatives have never been, so much in favour of equality. But it's also, maybe it's unfair to call it a marginal issue, but it's not one that I think many people in the country are thinking about. So why is a Tory frontbencher bringing up critical race theory in the middle of a pandemic? Kojo Karam again.
It really is remarkable to see a Conservative minister stand up in Parliament and say that this government stands unequivocally against a specific academic theory and tradition of scholarship. Could you imagine a junior minister standing up and saying this government stands against existentialism or even, gender studies? Like, this is quite dramatic. And I think it's because they have identified critical race theory as something that feeds into this growing culture war that the government are trying to fan in order to cover up for the substantive structural failings that they've achieved, not only through the COVID-19 crisis, but in terms of their much wider policy platform. I think critical race theory is misunderstood as something that is the kind of nefarious underbelly to all discussions around race and whiteness and empire and privilege. And it's been made as this kind of boogeyman, this scapegoat that the government are trying to wield out in order to generate a lot of anger and opposition towards a culture that they're presenting as being something that's in opposition to themselves.
That was Kojo Karam, lecturer in law at Birkbeck School of Law. Aaron, I want your take on this. Why are Tory frontbenchers in the middle of a pandemic bringing up some obscure theory from the United States from legal scholars in the 1980s?
Well, I have to disagree to some extent. I think critical race theory is actually really important right now. And the reason why is that people have been saying, why are BAME people more likely to die than white people as a result of COVID-19? I mean, and the Tories have been asking that question. It hasn't been just like a Novara ultra-left question. The entire mainstream media has been asking it. Politicians have been asking it because the data speaks for itself. And the explanation would come from critical race theory. They would say that, as well as equality under the law, civic and political rights being given to everybody regardless of the colour of their skin, you also need a social economic settlement which can make up for historic injustices, which keep certain groups locked out of opportunity, access to resources, keep them locked in low incomes, etc., etc., etc. So that's it. It's really not that hard. And people say, well, I thought we got rid of, it wasn't like racism didn't disappear the day that, Martin Luther King said, I had a dream, or when Lyndon Johnson, in 1964 got the Civil Rights Act in. And nobody thinks that. Everybody accepts racism exists in the 21st century in many ways. Now, we can have a debate about how far you want to take that. So I find it strange that on the one hand, you've got Tory politicians who are perfectly obliging to discuss this. On the next, on the next sort of hand, about 3 months later, it's now kind of gone out of fashion. It will come back in, by the way, as the death toll continues to rise. It has done in the last couple of weeks. It's just reaching, Michael. That's all it is. It's just reaching, and it's about how are the Tories going to win the next general election? It's pretty clear. Or how do they think they can win the next general election? It's not on the basis of an economic settlement that benefits most people. It is, I would argue, it's threefold. First, the value of house prices have to keep on going up. How's that going to happen? Through quantitative easing. That's the first bit of their coalition. The second bit will get Brexit done, right? The third bit, the Labour Party, these loony lefties, they hate white people. They want to, get rid of the white race. That's the subtext here, by the way. That's implicit in all of this stuff. They want to give refugees council houses and so on and so forth. And between these three elements, and I think this is correct, by the way, they won't get below 40% of the vote. And to be fair, a significant part of that is coming from the house prices element. It's not coming from the culture war stuff, but it helps. And so in their view, given you've got a historic downturn, given you've got a public health crisis, that precedent since the early 20th century, this is a key constitutive part of their response. Do they believe it? Some do, some don't. I think, to be quite frank, most of them haven't got the first idea what critical race theory even means. And again, that's the use of the term. And herein is a lesson for the left. A term like critical race theory. Now, how it's like you're really good on this, I think, with abolitionism. Abolitionism is how useful a term is that really for the left, given the point it's trying to convey. And I think it's a similar point here. Look, we're not going to relitigate what black theorists and scholars and activists decided was a perfectly important, and it is, term in the 1980s. But the use here, the efficacy here for the Tories is that, frankly, none of them and none of the people that they're actually trying to talk to even know what this term actually means.
I actually want to get up one more clip of Kojo, because we spoke also about what I think is a very important point. And to be honest, something I hadn't really thought about, because I'd just been thinking about this as, Tories trying to change the subject, trying to start a culture war. Yes, we should push back when they're sort of trying to delegitimize certain strands of thought, which are wholly legitimate, but ultimately it's a bit of a sideshow, it's a bit silly. But Kojo spoke to me about how this could actually have quite worrying effects in schools.
I've seen a few responses online today that I think have been rather disingenuous in saying that, well, the Equalities Minister wasn't banning critical race theories, you're just banning teaching it as an undisputable fact. I think when you have a government minister saying that they call something a dangerous trend, an ideology, says this government stands unequivocally against that, you are talking about a dramatically intimidating position that the government is taking upon what teachers feel comfortable being able to do within the classroom. I think that we've had so much conversation around censorship, and we've had the Free Speech Union emerge within the last few months, but yet they're suspiciously silent on this issue, if not openly cheering it. And I don't know, my understanding of censorship, thinking about the etymology of censorship, is that it is tied to state power. The people who the kind of Toby Young celebrate, your George Orwells, your Alexander Solzhenitskys, they took positions against state power. And now we have a situation in which if a teacher is in a classroom, a multiracial classroom, and says something like, which of the young black boys in this class has been stopped and searched? Put your hands up. Which of the young white boys in this class have been stopped and searched? Put your hands up. Let's discuss this for the next lesson. That has been deemed by the government as a dangerous trend, and that is something that the government stands against. Now, that to me is more concerning of censorship than the opposition that the Free Speech Union have towards, say, trans teenagers online.
So, I think that's such a good example of how, obviously, you don't have to see this through the lens of critical race theory, but what the Conservatives are pushing is to say that it is illegitimate and even sinister, actually, to say that, in this country, black people are treated differently to white people. Because what they want to do is sort of say, we want to propound the idea that anyone can achieve anything and it's just as easy for anyone to achieve anything. And to say otherwise is to sort of crush people's individuality. That's the argument they're putting forward. And that example that Kojo put forward there is just to say, in a class, it would be a very useful thing to do to say who has been stopped by the police. You see who puts their hands up. And, I can guarantee you it's going to be the black kids who've been stopped by the police and the white kids who haven't. And that should spark a very open debate about race and racism in our society because, we need to learn about these things. Not even in a sort of self-righteous, we need to learn about these things. We do need to learn about these things to correct injustices. But also, if schools are about encouraging people to understand the world, then that's such an essential feature of our social world at the moment. And that's such an obvious thing that a good teacher would do. And basically the Conservatives are now saying that is inherently suspicious to bring that up.
Yeah, it's really odd. What's interesting is I saw that, did you see the Free Speech Union, Toby Young's Free Speech Union?
Yeah, Kojo mentioned it there. Said they haven't said anything about this.
Yeah, but they tweeted the speech.
Oh my God.
And you think, okay, these guys are so passionate about free speech, they want the censorship of certain ideas in our schools. Give me a break. What a load of utter bollocks. All of this stuff is people like Toby Young, whose father was Michael Young, Lord Michael Young, who managed to get his son into Oxford despite him not having the grades to get in on the basis of a phone call because it's called nepotism. People like him are the ones that say they're censored despite writing for a panoply of right-wing newspapers and magazines in this country. The Spectator or the Mail or the Telegraph. You've got talk radio on every day saying, the mainstream media's got this wrong. Well, hold on. You're owned by News UK. You don't get more mainstream than that. Look, we've talked about this many times, about how this is just a fig leaf to really avoid the substantial topics in society, none more so than how class relates to race in the 21st century. What I found really funny is, before we move on, is Kemi Badenoch saying, BLM is a political movement. Yeah, no shit. Who knew? Again, particularly strange for a politician to be saying that. You as a politician, are you not allowed to go into a school? Your function is political. We're in a very strange place as a country in terms of the debate regarding what is a healthy education for our kids. On the one hand, people like Toby Young say they should be exposed to everything, which, by the way, means I can slag everybody off. But this one thing, critical race theory, that cannot be taught in schools.
It's the same. The civil rights movement was political. The suffragettes were political. Doesn't mean you can't teach them in schools. And also, it's interesting. No one says it's illegal to teach about the suffragettes without teaching about the people who thought that women shouldn't have the vote because they're biologically inferior or whatever. Yeah. That's again an interesting avenue for a history lesson, but you don't necessarily have to bring that up in PSHRE for you not to be breaking the law and indoctrinating the kids in your class. Very, very bizarre. Let's go to a few comments. We haven't gone to those for a while. So we've got Owen Garland with 150 Swedish something. Much love from Sweden. I wish I could be of more use from over here, but I had to bail. I wonder what you were doing here and what you were doing over there. This is why we need the phone-in show, which is why you need to go to novaramedia.com/support so we can upgrade all of our tech and have a little switchboard and everything like that.
Is Owen, are you the Irishman I met in Stockholm? It could be,
He could. Is Owen Garland the Irishman that Aaron met in Stockholm? Was
a good comrade.
Someone needs to take a look. You can donate as a sort of a pound SEK to give us your answer, so it will pop up for us. Christina Massey Stuckey with a £5. Great as always, gives me hope. Keep up your good work. Thank you so much, Christina. And Rusty Sleeves with 12.43, a lovely exact number. Shout out to my awesome housemate, Eunice, it's his first time watching and he's keeping me sane throughout this crazy time. Keep up the good work. Eunice, thank you for keeping Rusty Sleeves, probably not their real name, sane during this whole crazy time. I assume you're referring to lockdowns. And then we've got you're calling me handsome. That's very nice. From ZOC40, 15 quid. Happy birthday to your partner, Alex, and his twin brother, James. I was like, oh, they've got the birthday on the same day. Of course, they're twins. That makes sense. And a kind comment about our work. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. Next story. This is a big one. The battle between Manchester United star Marcus Rashford and Downing Street over free school meals has resumed this week. So in round one, Rashford campaigned for free school meals to continue over the summer holidays. So normally free school meals are something you get when you go into school. Because of the lockdown, because schools were closed, they were introduced as vouchers. The government had argued that they wouldn't be giving out those vouchers during the summer term because it's not during the summer holidays, because it's not the normal time when kids would get free school meals. Rashford launched a really successful campaign against that, against the fact that they'd be cut for the summer holidays, got loads of traction, ended up getting support from the Labour Party, who put forward an opposition motion, which looked like it was going to win, and the government had to U-turn. So people on low incomes got vouchers for free school meals throughout the summer. What Marcus Rashford has noticed now, and why we're in round two of this fight, is because whilst the government were willing to pay for free school meal vouchers in the summer for students on low income, sort of accepting that in the coronavirus crisis, people are short of cash and you shouldn't let kids go hungry in the summer during a global pandemic. I mean, in my mind, you shouldn't let them go hungry anytime, but I'm putting you in the head of the Tory logic on this. But they don't want to do the same for this half term and for the Christmas holidays, even though, as anyone can see, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic and loads of people are out of work, and it's going to be a really difficult Christmas for many people. Marcus Rashford has rightly come out and said, you need to do this again. You need to provide school meal vouchers for people over half term and over the winter. He's been promoting a petition. Let's get up the tweet from Marcus Rashford, which was from late last week. So this is sort of really sparking the next round in this battle. So Marcus Rashford tweeted, "The British public care 225k and rising," and then a link to the petition, which at this point 225k people have signed. "We will accept no less than the free ask. There are 1.5 million children we are not reaching with the free school meal scheme because of the universal credit cap. 1.5 million children in the UK in 2020 with no support." And then we can go take a look at those free demands. So it says the expansion of free school meals to every child from a household on universal credit or equivalent, reaching an additional 1.5 million 7 to 16-year-olds. Expansion of holiday provision, food and activities to support all children on free school meals, reaching an additional 1.1 million children. And increasing the value of the Healthy Start vouchers to £4.25 per week and expanding into all those on universal credit or equivalent, reaching an additional 290,000 pregnant women and children under the age of 4. Now, I mean, something that Marcus Rashford is very good at doing, I mean, obviously using his platform to try and achieve, great ends, is he puts stuff in, it's so difficult to disagree with that. How can you disagree with giving enough money so that kids can have good meals throughout the school holidays? How could you possibly oppose that? Well, there was a vote on it today in Parliament. So just like last time, Labour have sort of backed up Marcus Rashford's campaign by putting forward an opposition debate. This time it went to a vote and it lost. So Conservative MPs voted against the free school meals for a million children. And it was defeated 322 to 261 votes. Appalling, tragic. If one of your MPs voted against this, write them a letter now because they're a disgrace. But what I do want to show you now is how they are defending this. Because obviously you have to tell yourself quite a complicated story to justify, withdrawing meals from kids on low incomes. But they do manage it. So this was Tory Minister Paul Scully defending his plan at that time to vote against extending free school meal vouchers over the holidays.
Do you want to feed hungry children or not? That's a simple question. Some of the Conservative colleagues have already come out. Anne-Marie Morris has tweeted she'll be supporting us. I think Robert Halfon is on his way to supporting us. This is a matter of conscience. It's about principles before party. Are you going to put money forward to feed hungry children in one of the toughest winters of our generation or not? And if you're not going to, you have to go back to your constituencies and face the music.
We've had a situation where children are been going hungry under a Labour government for years. What we've done, we've put a universal credit system in place, which allows flexibility of people to go back to work and then topping up their incomes, so they don't have the cliff edge of the old benefit system that we saw under the previous Labour government. So we have been starting to tackle those issues of the people that are at that point on the pay scale, and making sure that their children can get fed.
Paul, did you say that children have gone hungry for years? Is that a division? I mean, is that acceptable?
No, it's not. Which is why I'm saying that we're actually been looking at how we can help parents over the long term, rather than the kind of situation that Tulip is sorting out. What can we do that's actually going to mean that the lowest paid can actually help feed their children for weeks, months and years to come? That'll be increasing the national living wage that we've been doing, introducing the flexible universal credit that allows them to top up and go back to work, which ultimately is the best way of making sure that you can work with your children and give them the lifestyle they do.
Children have gone hungry for years. That's his that's his justification to the country, but also to himself, why he's happy to vote to take away free school meal vouchers for children on low incomes when they're out of school term. So we say, no, people have gone hungry for years during half term, so this is a normal year, so kids should go hungry again. I mean, for one, it's not a normal year. I mean, there is unemployment and people struggling with incomes to a much greater degree than they have, in recent memory because of this coronavirus pandemic. But also, how is people have always gone hungry, so now they should go hungry? How is that a good argument? It's unbelievable.
Also, it's just the way that their arguments work as Conservatives, it's kind of on a par with you use an iPhone, therefore you can't criticise capitalism. It's like, well, you could have found that there were children who couldn't find food in 2009 if you looked hard enough. We know the data is around 2.6 million children were in relative child poverty in 2009-10. That was the last year of the Labour government. Before this pandemic, i.e. last year, that had gone up to 4.1 million. So it's almost doubled. Clearly with COVID, it's going to go far higher still. And the idea that, parents going into work, having the minimum wage topped up, it's not a living wage, it's a minimum wage, will help them, it is categorically untrue. Anybody who wants to do their research, and this is more than welcome to do so, go online, look at the data regarding in-work poverty. You're more likely to be in poverty now if you're in a household with somebody that works than that doesn't. That's quite a new development. And you can basically map on the rise of child poverty within work poverty. And this isn't new. This has been out there for a very, very long time. So rise in child poverty aren't because people haven't got jobs, it's because they have jobs and they're not being paid enough or they can't get the hours. And this is now going to be exacerbated with COVID. Either people are having their hours cut, or they're going to be on furlough, or they've lost their job altogether. So it just seems just an utterly ridiculous thing to say. How many children will be living in relative poverty by the end of this year? We might be looking at 6, 7 million. I mean, we don't know. That could be the ballpark, given it was 4.1 million at the beginning of last year. That would be, an order of 4 times greater than the last Labour government. So for every kid in poverty then, you've got 4 now. Let's be real. That's a really shambolic way to run a country. That wasn't 100 years ago. It was 10 years ago. And the money's there. Was Eat Out to Help Out? Was that creating a dependency culture? The fact I could go to Nando's and eat a lunch for £5?
No, because they assumed you were already middle class, and middle class people can't be dependent. It's only working class people who can be dependent on the state. It's only their benefits who have to be cut. I want to go to some more Tory justifications of this. And I mean, stupidly, many Tory MPs decided that they were going to express their opposition to the free school meals campaign by getting into a Twitter row with one of the country's most popular people, Marcus Rashford, Man United striker. So to introduce this, I want to first start with the tweet that both of them were responding to. So it's Ben Bradley and Steve Baker who respond, but they're responding to this tweet from Marcus Rashford this morning. So paying close attention to the Commons today and to those who are willing to turn a blind eye to the needs of our most vulnerable children, 2.2 million of them who currently qualify for free school meals, 42% newly registered, not to mention the 1.5 million children who currently don't qualify. So he's saying paying close attention to the Commons because there was going to be that debate and that vote. It has been lost because the Tories voted against it. But let's go to these responses. So Tory MP Ben Bradley decided to wade in and give his sort of justification for why, or his explanation of why he believed Marcus Rashford was wrong on this. Let's get this up. Government has a lot of responsibilities, supporting the vulnerable, helping people to help themselves, balancing the books. Not as simple as you make out, Marcus. Extending free school meals to school holidays passes responsibility for feeding kids away from parents to the state. It increases dependency. So now we've got this, I mean, we've already said, dependency is something in this Tory ideology that only applies to working class people, middle class people who are dependent on the state. That's fine. Industries which are only viable, Serco, because the government will hand them huge contracts, 12 billion contracts to not do their job properly. I mean, that's dependency culture. But even, apart from that, even if you take away the politics from this and just look at this from a human level, what he is suggesting there, that, and even if you think that people should be disciplined to go back to work, otherwise they'll have financial difficulties, whatever. Even if you buy into that sort of neoliberal, neoclassical ideology that you have to incentivize people to go back to work by making them poor, he is genuinely suggesting that we should leverage hungry kids to discipline their parents. So we're saying, how do we get parents to work harder? We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. There aren't jobs if even people decide. Well, it's not a decision anyway. But we
don't want them to work.
The point we don't want to make is that will spread the virus. But the point I want to make is that he there is genuinely suggesting the way we get parents to behave in a way that we like, which is is rational, utility maximizing workers, is to leverage the suffering of their kids. And also, an important point to make about dependency here, right, is, and this is sort of like a standard sort of Marxist or social democratic idea about dependency, which is that workers are dependent on their bosses to some extent. And the more that the alternative to working in any job is, complete horror, the more dependent they are. So if you live in a decent welfare state in Sweden in the 1970s, to an extent, it's still decent. You've got your healthcare guaranteed, you've got your housing guaranteed, you're guaranteed that your child isn't going to starve if you get fired by your boss. You have the security to organize against your boss. You have the security to maybe decide, oh no, I don't want that job because they don't treat me right. I'm going to hold out and wait till I can get a job which I feel is more suited to me, where I'm treated better, where my dignity is respected. Now, that's possible if you've got this sort of safety net behind you. But if a worker is told, you either keep this job, you either take that job, or your kid starves, how much power does that give that boss? If that boss is someone who's committing sexual harassment in the workplace, and you tell the mum, well, if you don't have a job, then that's your responsibility and your kid should starve. That is making that person so much more dependent on a boss than anyone will ever be dependent on the state.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's just we are looking square in the face at an utterly depraved genre of politics, utterly depraved, completely devoid of any ethics. Because they would then say, well, you should have thought twice about that before you had a child. You might be sexually harassed one day. Well, there's laws against this. That's not how it works. It's just. We're looking at people with absolutely no ethical compass whatsoever, who are more likely to get upset about being called scum in the House of Commons than voting for voting against a proposed piece of legislation which would keep 1 million kids away from hunger over the next several months. Which do you think is more important?
I know. We're going to get up another. This tweet exchange is even dumber. This is from Steve Baker, who Marcus Rashford wholly owns. So Steve Baker, sort of a hardcore Brexiteer backbencher. So in response to that particular tweet from Marcus Rashford, which I read earlier, Steve Baker quote tweeted it, "No one will be turning a blind eye, and it is wrong to suggest anyone would. Not destroying the currency with excessive QE is also one of our duties." Now, this is bananas. So
he is crazy. I mean, he's the craziest MP on the Tory benches.
Yeah, I mean, the policy before, sort of extending free school meals over the summer holidays, cost £120 million. Now, half term and the Christmas holidays are only 3 weeks, 1 week, add 2 weeks. So it's half of that. So we're talking about £60 million. And he thinks that £60 million is going to mean we have to print so much money that it destroys the pound.
Well, presumably he's talking about the fact that we are going to run at least a £200 billion deficit this year, probably significantly higher. But in any case, like you say, more's the reason. If we're spending a deficit of 200 billion, what difference is 120 million going to make? And by the way, you're not particularly productive if you're starving, right? There are some basics that we need to think about here. But he is the most crazy. You know, he wants Britain to go back to the gold standard, Michael. So he is particularly ridiculous and evil.
And you might have noticed, if you had a keen eye, we can get that up one more time, that same tweet. Because at the bottom, it says the only people who can reply to this are people who follow Steve Baker or people mentioned in it. So he's sort of calling out Marcus Rashford with this idiotic point. And he hasn't let Marcus Rashford reply to him. So Marcus Rashford, smart guy that he is, quote tweets Steve Baker. We can get this up. He says, "At least turn on your comments and let me respond, Steve. I very much welcome conversation on this." And then the most surreal bit is Steve Baker's response to this. This isn't actually my notes. This might take us a little while to get up. Before that,
well, can I say before that, the night before, can we just take a moment here to appreciate Marcus Rashford? The night before all of this, he scores the winning goal in the Parc des Princes against Paris Saint-Germain in the 84th minute. What a guy!
What a guy!
You know, it's like Colin Kaepernick. He did great things politically, but you know, he wasn't a very good footballer.
Well, he got that OBE, didn't he?
American football.
He got that OBE for a fantastic campaign, and now the Conservatives are turning around. MBE, was
MBE.
it? I don't know the difference. What's the difference between an MBE?
No idea. He should have rejected it, but whatever. If he did it for his mum, whatever, fine. That logic, by the way, does not apply to Keir Starmer.
All right, Fox, can we get up Steve Baker's really bizarre reply to this? So in reply to that tweet from Marcus Rashford, Steve Baker says, "You have 3.4 million followers, Marcus, to my 96K. The power is yours here. Everyone knows feeding hungry children is a top priority. I'd like to see universal credit boosted. But if the economy and currency collapse, the poor will be devastated. Alleging a blind eye is just wrong." Now, we've already talked about why it's ridiculous to suggest that paying £60 million for some poor kids to have free school meals is not going to collapse the currency. This is someone who wanted a no-deal Brexit, by the way. He's spent the last 4 years fighting for a no-deal Brexit, which is, I mean, I don't think it would be the worst thing to ever happen, but one thing it's not going to have a good effect on is the value of the pound. So this guy thinks that a no-deal Brexit, which has already cost billions in preparation, is going to be more damaging to the currency than £60 million to make sure that poor kids don't go hungry.
We left the gold standard in like 1931. He wants to go back to this. Like people talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg, the member for the honourable member for the 19th century. This guy's next to him.
The more ridiculous bit here, though, is this idea that you have more power than me. Like, only one of you, there's Marcus Rashford and then there's Stephen Baker, only one of you got to vote today in Parliament on the motion to extend free school meals over half term and the winter holidays. It was Steve Baker. Steve Baker voted against it. So he said, I might be elected an MP. I might be the person who makes the law. But if you've got more Twitter followers than me, you're more powerful than me.
Such an online comment, isn't it? I may have, I may be one of 650 legislators in this country, but, how many engagements did I get this month compared to you? Not much.
Bizarre. We're going to move on to our next story.
People are saying, by the way, in the comments, this story is a bit too online. I don't think that's fair, and I'll tell you why. Normally, I agree that it's important not to obsess over social media stories. I agree with that entirely. But I think clearly that the scope for pushback in terms of the government's mismanagement on COVID is quite limited because people can't protest. People can't go into meetings. People can't do all the things, the associated things that would normally happen in a political crisis. That's how people respond collectively. And so I think in a moment like that, this is going to be one of the primary ways we're going to see rifts and pushback, whether it's through local politicians like Andy Burnham, and that was incredibly mediatized. Of course I'd prefer 100,000 people on a demo or a general strike. Of course I would, but realistically in the context of a pandemic, that's not going to happen. These kinds of stories in that context I think really matter.
And yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of the obvious thing in response to it's very online is that there was a vote in Parliament today on it, right? So there was a material opportunity for the Tories to change their policy. They did change it last time, which shows that this kind of thing matters. I mean, obviously, him being a top Man United and England striker means that he does have a lot of influence. And I think there are many Tories who worry that this is doing them damage, the fact that they haven't U-turned again this time. And as to the tweets, I mean, why I like looking at Tory MPs' Twitter feeds is not so much because I think, obviously the electorate doesn't read Tory MPs' Twitter feeds, but what they do expose is their justifications for doing things. Because I think often, sometimes they get caught out when they go on TV, but in their official communications, normally they've at least got, a PR person to say, I'm not sure you should say that. That makes you sound like a psychopath. But when it's just them on Twitter, they're a bit like, no. Poor kids should go hungry, otherwise the parents won't bother working. That wouldn't go out in an official communication, but on their Twitter, they're stupid enough to think that's a convincing argument. Let's go on to our next story. We are going to go now to a Novara reporter. Novara, if you've been checking out our website recently, our articles team have been doing lots of reporting at the moment on some of the sort of most interesting struggles that are going on at the moment. In the context of COVID-19. One of those is, we've talked about it a lot, the horrific way that students are being treated by universities and the government. They were sort of coaxed to go into their halls, told they'd have a normal student experience, and then locked in. Now, many of them are now saying this is not on. We're going to get organised, and what we are going to do is use our leverage to stop paying rent. Yes, rent strikes in student halls. There is a brilliant article on the Novara website by Rivkah Brown about this, and I spoke to her earlier today to tell me what's going on.
Yesterday, a group of students in Manchester announced their rent strike, comes shortly after the announcement of a similar strike in Bristol. And those strikes have both been put together incredibly quickly, which I think is something very noteworthy. Most of the students who are involved are first years who moved into halls literally a matter of days ago, weeks ago, and many of them have very little organising experience. From the people that I spoke to, some had attended a Black Lives Matter protest, some had joined the Labour Party shortly before the last election, done a bit of leafleting, but for the most part, they were very inexperienced. In Bristol, there's at least 900 students who've now committed to striking, and in Manchester, it's something like 200. In both cases, it's far beyond what they foresaw, the kind of buy-in and support from the students. But it will remain to be seen, I guess, how many of the students that have signed up on paper do actually cancel their direct debit and go ahead with the strike. And I think it will be a test of some of their nerve. So yeah, I suppose we'll see towards the beginning of next week how many students actually have withheld their rent. There is a kind of general outrage which has been helpfully, I think, kind of cultivated also by the media attention that they've received, the poor conditions in halls, the rapid lockdown and unexpected kind of turnaround from universities that were saying you can have blended learning. Oh no, wait, you can have only online learning. You will deliver your food, but it won't be vegetarian if you're vegetarian, or it won't come on time, or you'll get 10 jars of peanut butter. And that kind of media attention that they've received for the mistreatment that they've got from universities has really helped to, I think, cultivate a good, healthy sense of outrage among a lot of students. And I think that's been a very mobilizing force. One of the things that students have on their side, which many of the groups point out on their kind of promotional sort of stuff and social media, is that the universities that they're studying at are, often prestigious, Russell Group, fearful of reputational damage in a way that your average landlord, your average estate agent simply isn't. And so these students have a great window of opportunity to act and to strike, but I would love for all of those students who are striking currently to kind of move into housing activism as they graduate, and the kind of slightly rougher terrain of the private rented sector. So I think it's a great development, and I'm really excited to see how it goes this weekend and how many students kind of come through on cancelling their direct debits. But I also really kind of look forward to the broader movement and the longer term kind of housing activists that it hopefully gives birth to.
That was Rivkah Brown, brilliant journalist with Novara Media. You can read that report on novaramedia.com. We're going to go to our final story. First of all, let's go to a few more super chats. Aaron, that Owen Garland is not the Owen you met in Sweden. He hasn't met any of us. He grew up in the UK but saw a better life was a possibility in Sweden. Let us know if you visit again. Oh, that's a very nice offer.
Great country, Sweden. I think if I was 18 now, I'd move to Sweden.
Even in the middle of the herd immunity coronavirus strategy?
That would put me off. It's a beautiful country.
We'll go to Sweden when the vaccine's around, eh?
Wonderful country. All Brits should go there because it's not like a, post-capitalist utopia. It's just a moderately well-run social democracy with quite a lot of neoliberalism, and it's still so much better than Britain.
Simran with a fiver. If Aaron's theory is true, house prices plus culture will equal 40+% for Tories no matter what. Is there a strategy to combat that?
Yes, it was called Jeremy Corbyn. It was called Class War Social Democracy. But instead, we decided to waste 4 years talking about a vote which was determined in 2016 and wasted potentially a historic opportunity.
Very succinct answer there. Bid of sound, or bide of sound, or blide of sound. With a fiver, respect to Michael, Aaron and all Novara team, lost for words on repugnant behaviour of Tory government, therapeutic to listen to a rational critique. We're going to go to our final story now, which is an entertaining one. Before we do that, though, Novara Media survives off the support of our very kind donors, the Novara Media family, those of you who give us the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month so we can keep growing. I feel like we've achieved quite a lot this year. The numbers are going up. We've got a bigger team. We're getting original reporting out from Novara Media.
Novara FM.
Novara FM is back.
James has got a great podcast tomorrow with novelist Harry Kunzru, big name. It was a great episode last week with a great scholar, Naomi Mills, on Rosa Luxemburg. It was a great podcast. I recommend go to iTunes or Spotify to listen. So Novara has been going from strength to strength. Can I just say, Michael, I think, it's on the good ship Novara. It's Michael, which is on the masthead, like the mermaid. It's got Michael Walker on the front.
Well, a bit of an inside scoop. I think Tysky Sale needs one more hand on deck. We've been talking about this during the clips. We need one more hand on deck. So if you go to support.novaramedia.com, we can get one more hand on deck, which means that clips are, put together in good time. We're not sort of panicking in the last half an hour, because you should see this studio in the 30 minutes before 7 p.m. It's, have to have a little zen moment before we go live. Anyway, we're going to go to our final story now. The success of the Great British Bake Off has led to thousands of copycat shows. The latest is The Chop, launched this week by Sky History. Now, this is normally seen as a safe, if somewhat dull format. You get people to compete to sort of do a task, be that dancing, cake baking, sewing. But this time around, Sky History sort of found themselves in a controversy that they hadn't bargained for. Let's look at the advert for the show they shared online this week.
I am patient to a degree. So if there's going to be people that's going to be getting in my way, there won't be fireworks. So I'm known as the Woodman.
The Woodman?
Yeah, the Woodman. That's what I turn up and I am the Woodman.
Because you work with wood?
Yeah. Smashed it again. I've got big fingers. Yeah, I've got little Cumberlands.
I'm not going to lie to you, Darren. If you were the bloke in my town, you wouldn't be known as the Woodman. You'd be the bloke with all the tattoos. Surely that takes precedence over the Woodman.
That was the hardest group task I've done so far. Yeah, that was tough. That was tough. Yeah, possibly, but I think this approach is a little bit more subtle, a little bit softer. Yeah. Chop, innit?
So it's actually kind of a classic advert for a TV program. Like, it looks kind of nice and light-hearted. There's this juxtaposition of he's got tattoos all over his face, but he's quite softly spoken. Lee Mack's there to make the kind of, semi-insulting joke, but soft enough that it sort of lands well. He's saying, I wouldn't know you as the wood guy. I'd know you as the tattoo face guy. Anyway, there was something that the producers of that show hadn't bargained for. There's going to be some researchers, maybe in a little bit of trouble here. I'm not sure. I hope not. I hope no one gets fired for this. But it turns out that those weren't just any old tattoos. No, Lumsden's face is covered with symbols for white supremacy. So this first became apparent because, if you'll have noticed, he had a huge 88 on his cheek. So you can see there that 8. Now, I actually didn't know this. I learned about this through this controversy. But it turns out that's one of the most common neo-Nazi symbols. So H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. 8 equals HH. HH equals Heil Hitler. So he there, allegedly, he does have a symbol for Heil Hitler on his cheek. He might deny that was the intention, but that's what it stands for.
Under there, what does it say on his top of his lip?
Oh, is that homegrown?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of context here. Homegrown, 8-8. And by the way, 8-8 it also kind of looks like the SS runes. So it has a double meaning.
Yep. We've got Adam Rutherford, who's a sort of academic. Academic broadcaster, wrote a great book, actually, How to Argue with Racists. He sort of pointed out that it wasn't just that 8-8. It wasn't just the 88 Heil Hitler. There was actually loads of symbols on this guy's face which are associated with white supremacy. So let's take a look at that thread. So he writes, okay, a quick thread on white supremacy symbols. I spend a lot of time on white supremacy forums online, and they have dozens of really idiotic numerical codes, most of which are substitution ciphers that a 7-year-old would come up with. Darren appears to have 2 on his face, or appears to have these 2 on his face. So 88HH equals Heil Hitler, as we've just discussed. He also has 2316. And the 23 is for W, so the 23rd letter of the alphabet, and the 16 is for P, for power, so it means white power. There's also 18, which is AH, which equals Adolf Hitler, and then 1488, so this seems to be like a really big deal one. The 1488 is a reference to the so-called 14 words coined by white supremacist terrorist David Lane. Those 14 words are, again, this is something I sort of looked into today, researching, not something I was particularly aware of. If I'd seen that, to be fair, if I'd seen that number on someone's face, if I was researching a show, I would have looked it up at least, but I wouldn't necessarily.
You're not familiar with 1488?
I'm not familiar with Well, I am now, so, something's good's come out of this. 1488, so the 14 is a reference to the 14 words coined by white supremacist terrorist David Lane. The 14 words are, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So Lane, who is credited with the slogan, was sentenced to 190 years in prison due to his activities as a member of the Order. The group murdered a Jewish radio host in 1984. These weren't the only symbols. Let's get some more. Let's get up this next tweet from Adam Rutherford. So there's also 111, AK Aryan Knights. 311, which is free. The 11 is K is the 11th letter of the alphabet. So 3K equals KKK. And then 109 equals the claim that the Jews have been expelled from 109 nations throughout history, and then it's often coupled with 110 in the hope that the US will be the next one.
Wait, but these were all on his face? I think this is all of the numbers. They're not
is he just giving us so it's that first one where they were on his face, and then he's now saying these are the other numbers.
I think there were like 3 or 4 on his face, but yeah, not like the 109 and 110. I don't think they were on his face.
So it was just the first set.
Yeah.
But I think the 1488 was, because I think he had a 14 on one side and the 88 on another.
As I understand it, yes, there was an image in the Daily Mail. I don't like to read the Daily Mail, but it had a very decent image, and it appeared to indicate that, and the 16 as well.
And these have been used by very dangerous white supremacists. So this isn't just an online meme thing. So Dylan Roof, who committed the Charleston church massacre in 2015, he posted a picture of 1488 written in sand on his website. It actually gets more, obviously this is all quite dark, but there's also a ridiculous element to this. So in response to social media users pointing out the symbolism of the tattoos, and especially the 88 one, because it's obviously the biggest, most prominent one, Sky History pulled the show. They said it would remain off air until they investigated the meaning of the tattoos. They then followed up with this explanation. So let's get this up. These are Sky tweets. They say, Darren's tattoos denote significant events in his life and have no political or ideological meaning whatsoever. Amongst the various numerical tattoos on his body, 1988 is the year of his father's death. The production team carried out extensive background checks on all the woodworkers taking part in the show that confirmed Darren has no affiliations or links to racist groups, views or comments. Sky History is intolerant of racism and all forms of hatred, and any use of symbols or numbers is entirely incidental and not meant to cause harm or offence. Now, there are two problems with this. So one, 88 wasn't the only neo-Nazi symbol on his face. So it'd be quite coincidental if all of these numbers had sort of white supremacist meanings. The 1988, maybe you could do one by mistake, but to do a few by mistake, that would be, I suppose, unlikely. Two, and this is probably the biggest problem, his dad's not dead. So this was an exclusive in today's Daily Mail. So let's get up the headline. So exclusive, I'm not dead yet. Father whose death in 1988 was caused by Sky History's was used by Sky History's The Chop to explain his son's Nazi-style Heil Hitler 88 tattoos, reveals he's very much alive. And the story here is really bizarre, I suppose in the style of like Mail Online. So let's get a quote from the story. So Trevor, who is the dad, told Mail Online, I'm here, aren't I? I'm alive and kicking, so I'm not dead yet. Darren's father has short-term memory loss after a serious motorbike crash more than 30 years ago. He lives in a shared house and has support workers popping in to help every day. The father added, I haven't seen Darren for some years. I didn't know he had tattoos over his face or that he was going to be on TV. But if they are saying I'm dead, then I'd like them to know I'm not. Now, this story is so weird. I mean, the dates kind of do add up to like maybe he thought he died in a motorbike accident, but actually he just lost his memory. But then it's still, I mean...
And now in 2020, he's being falsely accused of being a neo-Nazi.
And now, because of appearing on The Chop and being accused of being a neo-Nazi, he's been reunited with his dad, who also had short-term memory loss. The whole thing is so bizarre. But again, that wouldn't explain all the various other sort of white supremacist symbols on his face. And it does seem like the explanation here has all fallen apart.
Also, like, let's not be entirely credulous. You've got, like... a really well-built guy who works with wood, whose face is covered in tattoos, has the number 88. Like, there's a 99.9% possibility the guy's a neo-Nazi. Like, you don't need to do the other stuff. Where does this credulity come from, anyway?
I mean, the thing that's funnier, actually, because I've said kind of like, if I was a researcher, I would hope I would look up the meaning of these tattoos. But I, before seeing this, didn't know that 88 was Heil Hitler. But for the producers of this show to be told, look, these are a load of neo-Nazi symbols, and they just put out straight away, within a day, like a multi-million-pound company, oh no, nothing going on here, it's all completely fine. 88 was the year his dad died. It's like, come on! Like, what kind of crisis management is that?
And also, it's a history channel.
It is, yeah, they should know these
super
things.
Weird. It's and also, why are they talking to people like about woodwork in the 21st century when it's the History Channel? Anyway, also, by the way, this is really indicative of how widespread this stuff is. It's a major thing. Cultural sort of adoption of neo-Nazi runes and so on is a thing. Go on Instagram, hashtag Operation Werewolf. Operation Werewolf was the Nazi strategy, basically, if if the Allies won, they would have carried on basically through a terrorist-style, low-intensity insurgency. There are normal people walking around who see themselves as part of Operation Werewolf. Be interesting. Maybe we should get this guy here on a lie detector. Get him to take his shirt off, because God knows what's under there. if that's what he's willing to show people,
that's true.
And get him on a lie detector.
So no, my dad just had Hitler. My dad looked suspiciously like Adolf Hitler. It's him on my chest. Sky History tweeting out. No, the picture that looks like Adolf Hitler on his chest is actually a picture of his late. He's going to have to invent someone that's not his father, like his stepfather or something like that. Fox is saying careful with libel, but this is all suggests that we're not saying he has Hitler tattooed on his. No one's seen his chest, but what could be there, we don't know. Let's wrap up there. It's been a very packed show today. I feel almost exhausted. We have a super chat from Joseph Byrne, 20 quid. I hope Novara gets 100k subs soon. Michael, you said 100k would help you sleep better in past videos. It would help me sleep better. So let's get to that soon. Also, would you guys at Novara take a trip to the town of Novara one day? Have you ever been to Novara, Aaron?
I've not been to Piedmont, the region I've not been to Turin. I'd love to go. We should go.
We should go to Novara. We should have a team
building exercise.
Team building exercise in Novara. Although, don't worry, if you donate 1 hour's wage a month to us, it's not going to go to a team building exercise in Novara. It's going to go to expanding the team, getting us an assistant so we're less stressed, and can keep giving you the quality output that you seem to like because you keep going back to it.
Can I just say as well, crystal clear, Novara Media, we're all paid the same amount of money. We're a socialist organisation. We don't just produce socialist content. We're socialist in content and in form. And we run the organisation on socialist lines. So the last place your money will be going is a Ponzi away day to Northern Italy.
All right. Let's end on that note. We'll be back on Friday at 7 p.m. Don't know what we'll talk about. Depends what happens between now and then. As ever, thank you for watching this show. Let's see. We got 2,118 people watching. We've got 719 likes. There's only 30 seconds left, but I think we can get to 1,000 before we go off air. No, I'll just wait here before I say goodbye.
Contemplate Michael's face.
We'll just have a sort of zen moment while we can all relax after what's been quite a jam-packed show. I'm not going to keep refreshing. We're going to let you go. We'll be back on Friday at 7 p.m. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara. Good night.